The late afternoon sun bled across the Montana sky, painting the wide horizon in bands of crimson and gold. Dust rose in lazy swirls behind Jack Thompson's sleek black SUV. As it hummed along the lonely country road, the landscape stretched out in every direction, endless fields meeting the jagged silhouette of distant mountains. It should have felt peaceful, but Jack's grip on the steering wheel told another story. His knuckles whitened with every mile, tension pulsing through the muscles of a man who carried the weight of empires on his shoulders. At 38, Jack was the kind of man whose name appeared in magazines, whose company's products were in homes around the globe. He was hailed as a visionary, a self-made millionaire who had built his fortune brick by relentless brick. But for all the accolades and wealth, Jack felt a gnawing emptiness inside, a hollow echo that not even his sprawling Seattle penthouse could drown out. Success had become a drug, each new achievement giving a high that faded faster than the one before. Tonight, he was driving toward a farmhouse he had bought unseen, hoping that burying himself in the quiet of Montana might dull the roar of everything he could not admit he had lost. Just a few more miles, he muttered, glancing at the glowing coordinates on his dashboard. He imagined the farmhouse sitting in the stillness, waiting for him to fill it with meaning. For the first time in years, Jack wanted something he couldn't buy: silence, simplicity, maybe even peace. The road ahead shimmered in the evening heat, and at first, Jack thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But as he drew closer, shapes emerged from the mirage. 3 small figures trudging along the side of the highway, their silhouettes sharp against the golden light. No adults in sight, no houses anywhere nearby. He slowed instinctively, confusion and concern breaking through his usual guarded detachment. As the SUV rolled nearer, he could make out details: thin shoulders, sunburned faces, clothes that looked worn to threads. They walked close together, almost as though they were tethered by some invisible cord. Jack's heart kicked against his ribs. Children, alone. He pulled onto the gravel shoulder and lowered the window, dust curling into the warm air. The children turned in unison, 3 pairs of eyes fixing on him with a mixture of wariness and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. Jack leaned out, voice steady though curiosity thrummed beneath it. "Are you kids all right? Where are your parents?" The eldest, a boy with a stubborn set to his jaw, stepped forward, slightly, as if shielding the other 2. His clothes hung loose, his hair tangled from wind and dust, but his eyes green, sharp, unwavering, met Jack's with a composure far beyond his years. "We're okay," he said carefully, though his small shoulders trembled as though from exhaustion. It was then that Jack noticed the girl in the middle. Her hair tangled, but her expression lit with a fierce intensity. She studied his face like she had been searching for it. Slowly, she reached into her backpack, her little hands fumbling with the zipper, until she pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. No, not paper. A photograph. She held it up to him, her voice trembling, tiny and yet so clear it cut through the silence of the fields. "Are you our daddy?" Jack's world tilted, his chest constricted as if the wind had been knocked out of him. He stared at the photograph, an image of himself younger, smiling, arms wrapped around a woman he hadn't seen in nearly 8 years. Sarah, his Sarah. And now, 3 children with the same green eyes as his, standing on the side of a dusty Montana road, waiting for an answer that would change everything. The photograph trembled in the little girl's hands, its edges worn soft as if it had been carried close for years. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, the image blurring as his pulse thundered in his ears. There he was, frozen in time, his arm looped around Sarah Mitchell, her radiant smile filling the frame, her eyes brimming with the same warmth he had fallen in love with nearly a decade ago. He hadn't seen her face in 8 long years, yet here it was, carried like a treasure by children who looked so much like him, that the air seemed to collapse around him. His mouth went dry. The little boy with the scar on his eyebrow shifted protectively in front of the girl, his small hand curling into a fist. The 3rd child, a boy with softer features, clutched the strap of his backpack as though afraid to let go of the only possession he had left in the world. Jack pushed open the SUV door, his legs unsteady as he stepped onto the gravel. For a moment, he didn't trust his voice. The world felt unhinged, as if the past he thought he had buried was rising to devour him. What are your names?" he managed, his tone rough and uneven. "I'm Emma," the girl whispered, clutching the photo tighter. "This is Ethan." She nodded toward the boy with the scar. "And that's Evan." The names sliced through him like lightning. Not just names, but pieces of a life he had never been given a chance to know. He felt dizzy, as though he had been dropped into a story, written without his consent. His gaze swept over them again, and an Ethan's scar cutting neatly through his red eyebrow. Jack saw his own childhood, reflected back at him. He had gotten the same mark when he was 7, crashing his bicycle into a fence. The coincidence was too sharp to dismiss. He dropped to his knees on the hot asphalt, suddenly needing to see them eye to eye. "Where's your mother?" His voice cracked on the question he was almost afraid to ask. "Where's Sarah?" The three exchanged glances, a silent conversation that seemed older than their 5 years. Finally, Emma swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "Mommy went to heaven," she said softly. 2 weeks ago. The world tilted again, this time with crushing weight. Jack's vision blurred as grief punched through him. Sarah, gone, just like that. Ethan's chin lifted, his green eyes burning. "We had to stay with Aunt Melissa, but I found Mommy's special box. It had your pictures, your name, your address. Mommy always told us you were a good man who built important things. She said you didn't know where we were." Jack's knees threatened to give out entirely. His mind spun with fragments. Sarah leaving without explanation. His unanswered letters, the years of silence that had gnawed at him. And now, standing before him, 3 children with his eyes, his features, his blood. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I never knew about you." The third child, Evan, who had been silent until now, stepped forward hesitantly. His tiny hand reached up, brushing Jack's cheek with the tenderness of someone far older than his years. "Are you sad?" he asked simply. Jack hadn't realized he was crying until then. The tears fell freely now, carving lines through the dust on his face. He gathered himself enough to shake his head gently. "Not sad," he murmured, "just surprised, and very, very happy to meet you." Emma's eyes, too old for her small face, locked onto his. "Will you take us home with you?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope and fear entwined. Jack felt something shift inside him, something permanent. He looked into 3 pairs of eyes that mirrored his own and knew, with a clarity he had never felt in business, in boardrooms, in victory celebrations, that nothing would ever matter more than this moment. "Yes," he said, his voice steady now, carrying the weight of a promise. "I'm taking you home." As the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the lonely road, Jack helped the triplets into his SUV. The leather seats dwarfed their tiny frames as they sat huddled together, holding onto one another as though they had crossed a desert and finally reached water. Jack slid behind the wheel, his hands still shaking, his mind a storm of grief, wonder, and unanswered questions. He stole a glance at the photograph lying in Emma's lap, as Sarah's face frozen in time. What had happened 8 years ago to drive her away? Why had she never told him? And what had Aunt Melissa hidden all these years? The SUV rumbled back onto the highway, carrying with it for souls bound by blood, by secrets, and by a destiny none of them could have foreseen. But as Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at 3 identical pairs of green eyes watching him with fragile hope, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His life had just changed forever. The farmhouse stood at the edge of the rolling fields like a solitary sentinel, its white paint weathered by years of wind and sun, its windows dark and hollow as if waiting for life to fill them again. Jack slowed the SUV as the gravel crunched beneath the tires, the engine echoing off the old red barn that sagged slightly to the right. He had bought this house online in a moment of desperation, longing for escape from the noise of boardrooms and investors. He had imagined unpacking boxes alone, pouring himself whiskey in the silence of rural nights. Now, instead of silence, the back seat was filled with 3 pairs of eyes that mirrored his own, wide with exhaustion and unspoken questions. The children clutched each other as Jack killed the engine. For a moment, no one moved. Jack sat with his hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the porch he had thought would be his sanctuary. But nothing about this night was what he had expected. He glanced back at the triplet Emma with her photo pressed to her chest, Ethan staring out the window like a guard surveying unfamiliar territory, and Evan absently tracing the seam of his seatbelt as though lost in thought. They looked so small, and yet they carried a weight Jack could not yet name. "Come on," he said finally, his voice gentler than it had been in years. He stepped out, gravel crunching under his shoes, and walked around to open the rear door. The children hesitated before sliding out one by one, clutching their ragged backpacks. The cool night air swept across the yard, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Inside, the farmhouse was still half a skeleton. Boxes lay stacked against bare walls, furniture covered in sheets, and the faint hum of electricity whispered. From somewhere deep in the house, Jack flipped on the lights, bathing the front room in a dim yellow glow. The triplets huddled together just inside the doorway, their eyes scanning every detail with the cautious attention of children used to instability. "You can make yourselves comfortable," Jack offered, gesturing toward the leather couch he had dragged in from Seattle just a week ago. He realized how absurd that sounded in a place that looked more like a storage unit than a home. Still, the children padded forward, climbing onto the couch in a tight cluster, their backpacks still on their shoulders as if afraid someone might snatch them away. Jack moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets he had only half stocked. A row of soup cans gleamed dully under the flickering overhead light. He heated 3 quickly, poured them into bowls, and carried them carefully back into the living room. The triplets accepted them with quiet thank yous, spooning soup into their mouths, with the practiced precision of children who knew better than to waste food. Jack stood back, watching them with something like awe. When Evan spilled a spoonful onto his shirt, Emma immediately reached out, steadying his hand. It was such a small gesture, so natural, and yet it pierced Jack deeper than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He realized these three had already learned to rely on one another in ways he couldn't yet understand. As they ate, Jack stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered before pressing the one number he trusted most. "Michael," he said quietly when the line picked up. "It's urgent. I need everything you can find on Sarah Mitchell. Her life these past 8 years, her death certificate," and his voice caught. "Anything about children, triplets?" Michael's voice sharpened. "Jack, just do it," Jack said, his tone clipped with urgency. He ended the call before his friend could ask more questions. When he returned, the bowls were empty, stacked neatly on the coffee table. The triplets sat together, their heads leaning against one another, eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Jack's heart twisted. They were used to taking care of themselves, but they were only 5 years old. He gathered blankets from unopened boxes, spreading them across the couch and floor to fashion makeshift beds. The children curled into them without complaint, their breathing evening out quickly. For a long time, Jack sat in the armchair opposite, watching their identical faces soften in sleep in the moonlight streaming through the window. Ethel's scar gleamed faintly, the mirror of Jack's own childhood. Wound. The coincidence was too exact, too undeniable. Jack rose quietly, retreating into the kitchen. He poured himself water, but couldn't bring himself to drink. Instead, he sat at the table, laptop open, fingers trembling as he typed Sarah's name into the search bar. The obituary that appeared was brutally short. Sarah Mitchell, 36, died in a single-vehicle accident on County Road 18, survived by her triplets and sister, Melissa Reynolds. Jack's chest constricted. Sarah was gone. Vibrant, brilliant Sarah gone without him even knowing why she had vanished. Why she had never told him about the children. His hands shook as he pulled open an old showbox he had packed months ago. The one filled with letters he had written, but never sent after she disappeared. Letters full of questions, declarations, pleas. Letters that had sat in the dark, gathering dust, because there had been nowhere to send them. Now 3 small bodies slept in his house, proof that his unanswered words had never been in vain. Proof that Sarah had carried part of him with her all along. As dawn's first light touched the horizon, Jack leaned against the kitchen window, staring out across the empty fields. He wasn't sure what answers the day ahead would bring, but as the sun began to paint the sky gold, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Emma stood in the doorway, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, her small face lit with fragile determination. "Are you really going to keep us?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Jack knelt, his eyes burning. He met her gaze squarely. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, the words falling like a vow. "I promise." Morning light spilled across the Montana fields, gilding the farmhouse in pale gold. The triplets were still asleep, curled like small animals beneath blankets on the couch, their breathing soft and steady. Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty coffee cup in his hands, but his mind was anything but still. For years, he had chased deadlines and stock prices, his mornings dictated by ringing phones and impatient investors. Now, There was only silence and the sound of children shifting in their sleep in the next room. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it was the heaviest silence he had ever known, because it was full of questions. The obituary's words were etched into his brain. Sarah Mitchell, survived by her triplets and sister Melissa Reynolds. Her sister. The name glared at him from the page like a warning. Melissa had custody. Even if temporary, Melissa had been the one to tell the children that Jack didn't want them. Melissa, the gatekeeper of Sarah's last years. His jaw tightened. If there were answers, they lived with her by mid-morning. Michael had already messaged him a dossier. Sarah's nursing career, the mortgage on her modest home, the list of appointments she had kept, the list of appointments she had canceled, and the birth certificates, 3 of them, each with father, unknown typed in bold. Jack's fist slammed against the table. Sarah had known who he was. She would never have written that later that day. Jack parked outside a lakeside restaurant. That seemed to fine for the dusty little Montana town. He hadn't dressed for a business meeting, just a dark shirt and jeans, but the look on his face was sharper than anything he wore in corporate boardrooms. This wasn't a negotiation for profit margins. This was about blood, about truth. She was already there. Melissa Reynolds sat by the window, a navy pantsuit crisp against the backdrop of pine trees and glittering water. She rose slightly when she saw him, her smile practiced, her posture perfect. She had Sarah's eyes, but none of Sarah's warmth. Jack Thompson, she said coolly as he slid into the chair across from her. Finally, he echoed. I didn't even know you existed until yesterday. Yet somehow you've known about me for years. Melissa lifted her water glass, taking a slow sip before answering. I've been trying to locate my niece and nephews for 2 days. Imagine my surprise when you called instead of the sheriff. They found me, Jack replied flatly, walking down Route 16 with a photo of me in their hands. Hoping. He leaned forward, his voice low. Dangerous. Care to explain how that happened, when according to every document in existence, their father is listed as unknown? Melissa's lips curved in a humorless smile, because that's what Sarah wanted. Jack pulled a leather-bound journal from his bag and set it on the table. Sarah's handwriting ran across the pages in careful loops, her entries filled with hope, sorrow, and confusion. He tapped it once. That's not what she wrote here. For the first time, Melissa's composure faltered. A flicker of unease passed through her eyes. She tried to reach me. Jack continued, his voice tightening. She wrote letters, dozens of them. Our return address unknown. She called numbers that never connected. Funny thing is, I've had the same phone number and the same address for 10 years. So tell me, Melissa, who exactly intercepted those letters? Who blocked those calls? Melissa set down her glass with a little too much force. You really think you can come riding in after 8 years of absence and play the hero? She made her choices. She decided she was better off raising them alone than begging an unwilling man to acknowledge them. Jack's voice dropped lower, a blade beneath velvet. You're lying. She never stopped trying. She believed I had turned my back on her, on them, but she still told the kids I was a good man, because she never gave up hope. He leaned closer, his stare unflinching. And you made sure that hope went nowhere. Melissa's laugh was brittle, jagged around the edges. And you believe that? The great Jack Thompson, the busy signing billion-dollar contracts to notice the woman carrying his children disappeared. You searched? Really? With all your resources? Jack exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. I did search. I hired investigators. I called her parents until they changed their number. I wrote letters. Letters she never saw because they were intercepted. Letters that somehow wound up stacked in a box in her bedroom. Marked return to sender, and the person standing between her and me was always you. Color drained from Melissa's face, but her jaw set stubbornly. You have no proof. Jack straightened, his tone clipped. Not yet, but I've already filed for emergency custody. DNA tests are scheduled tomorrow, and my legal team is combing through every phone record, every postal receipt, every medical file that passed through your hands. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. It won't take long before I have all the proof I need. For the first time, Melissa's mask cracked, her smile twisted into something bitter, almost venomous. You weren't good enough for her, she hissed. All ambition, all greed. You would have crushed her spirit with your obsession. For success, I was protecting my sister, protecting her. Jack's voice thundered now, drawing stares from nearby tables. By lying to her, By robbing my children of their father. By letting Sarah believe she'd been abandoned. His hand slammed the journal on the table. That's not protection, Melissa. That's control. Melissa rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. The court granted me custody. You may have money, but I've been there for every fever, every nightmare, every scraped knee. You're a stranger to them. Jack remained seated, his eyes locked on her. A stranger you created. Melissa's face hardened into stone. She snatched up her purse, her heels clicking sharply against the tile as she strode away. But her parting words lingered like a curse in the air. You have 3 days, Jack. 3 days before the court takes them back. Enjoy playing daddy while you can. Jack didn't move. He sat motionless, Sarah's journal under his palm, her sister's venom still echoing. She was right about one thing. He was a stranger to them. But the children had looked at him with hope, not fear, and hope was stronger than Melissa's lies. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Michael. DNA lab technician arrived. Kids asking when you'll be back for the pancake dinner you promised. For the first time all morning, Jack smiled faintly. Let Melissa weave her webs. Let the courtrooms buzz with lies. He had 3 days to become more than a stranger and a lifetime to keep his promise. The farmhouse was alive in a way Jack had never imagined possible. The smell of batter sizzling on the stove drifted through the air as 3 small figures sat perched at the kitchen counter, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. Emma leaned forward, elbows on the counter, dictating shapes as though she were an art director commanding a chef. Make mine a star, she demanded with a grin, her tangled hair falling across her forehead. Ethan, the scar over his brow furrowing in concentration, added, rectangles are better, they're easier to stack. And quiet Evan, hands folded neatly in his lap, whispered almost to himself, could you do a dinosaur? Jack chuckled, the sound rusty from disuse. For years his mornings had been filled with conference calls and scrolling through stock reports, never with laughter that rose like sunlight through curtains. He flipped the pancakes with surprising grace, surprising even himself, and for the first time in a decade felt like he was building something real, something no board meeting could give him. But beneath the warmth of that morning lay tension coiled tight in Jack's chest. Melissa's venomous words at the restaurant still echoed in his mind. 3 days, Jack, then they're mine again. He looked at the triplets, so fragile, so brave, so impossibly his aunt swore he wouldn't let it happen. The children devoured the pancakes quickly, syrup sticking to their small fingers, and then they raced out into the yard where the golden autumn grass swayed in the wind. Jack followed, his boots crunching against the gravel. They skipped stones by the pond, their laughter ringing like bells. He watched Ethan throw with precision, Emma with dramatic flair, and Evan with careful concentration. Each child was a revelation. Each moment was a reminder of how much he had lost and how much he had to fight for. The sun climbed higher, and the day unfolded with the innocent chaos of children exploring a new world. By evening, the farmhouse hummed with life. Paper airplanes hung from the ceiling where Emma had declared them art. Ethan's rock collection lined the windowsill in meticulous order, and Evan had filled pages of a notebook with sketches of the fields and the pond. Jack moved through the house, gathering toys and papers, realizing how empty it had felt just days before, but the next morning shattered that fragile peace. Evan sat at the table, his pancake untouched. His normally rosy cheeks were pale, and his eyelids drooped as if weighed down by invisible hands. Jack crouched beside him. You feeling okay, buddy? He pressed his hand gently to the boy's forehead. No fever. Evan nodded faintly, his voice thin, just tired. Jack opened his mouth to suggest rest, but before the words left his lips, Evan's small body went rigid. His spoon clattered to the table. Then, as if strings had been cut, he collapsed forward, his head striking the wood with a sickening thud. Evan! Jack's voice cracked like a gunshot. He caught the boy just as Emma screamed, her bowl tipping over and spilling milk across the table. Ethan stood frozen, his scarred brow furrowed, eyes wide with terror. Jack lowered Evan to the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. The boy's chest rose and fell shallowly, to slow, to weak. Call 911. Jack barked. Michael, already moving, snatched the phone from the counter and spoke rapidly into it. The sirens came minutes later, but to Jack it felt like hours. He knelt on the floor, one hand pressed gently against Evan's chest, whispering words he barely understood himself. Stay with me, son. Just breathe. Daddy's here. It was the first time he had called himself their father out loud, and the word burned with both terror and love. The paramedics moved swiftly, voices clipped and efficient. Oxygen mask, stretcher, monitors. Jack climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, his hands gripping Evan's tiny arm, refusing to let go. Emma and Ethan huddled against Michael on the porch, their faces wet with tears as the sirens carried their brother away. At Pine Creek Memorial Hospital, the harsh fluorescent lights felt colder than any boardroom Jack had ever faced. A doctor in a white coat pulled him aside, her face grave. "Mr. Thompson, your son has a congenital condition called tetralogy of Fallot, heart defect. It looks like it was partially managed with medication, but he hasn't received the comprehensive care he needed." Jack's blood turned to ice. Memories of Sarah's journal entries returned with razor sharpness, mentions of Evan's heart murmur, notations about medication refills, appointments canceled again and again. "Has he seen a cardiologist?" The doctor pressed. Jack's throat closed. "No, his mother, she's gone. I only just..." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." The doctor's gaze softened. "The condition is treatable, but he'll need specialized care, possibly surgery. He's stable now, but this could have happened any time." Jack pressed his palms to his face, the weight of guilt suffocating him. He had been building empires while his son had been fighting for breath, and then Melissa appeared. Her heels clicked against the linoleum like a metronome of malice. She swept toward them, immaculate in cream-colored silk, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "I heard what happened," she announced. "Exactly what I was afraid of. Sarah trusted me for a reason." Jack's eyes blazed. "This isn't the time, Melissa. It's precisely the time," she hissed, lowering her voice just enough for the doctor not to hear. "A critical medical condition you knew nothing about. 2 weeks with you, and the boy nearly dies. You're unfit. I'll see to it the court knows." The doctor returned then, unaware of the undercurrent of venom. "We'll run more tests tonight and transfer him to Denver for specialist care as soon as he's stable." Jack nodded tightly, his gaze never leaving Melissa. But inside, suspicion bloomed like wildfire. The canceled appointments, the missing records, the way Melissa spoke as if she had known every detail. He felt it in his bones. Sarah hadn't abandoned him. Melissa had stolen years from him, and now, perhaps, she had endangered his son. As Evan slept in the hospital bed, machines humming beside him, Jack sat between Emma and Ethan, pulling them close. His voice trembled, but it carried the force of steel. "He's going to be okay," he told them, "because I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." The courthouse loomed like a fortress of judgment, its brick facade weathered by decades of Montana winters. That Monday morning, the steps were crowded with curious townsfolk and local reporters, drawn by the whispers that had spread like wildfire. Tech millionaire Jack Thompson fighting for custody of triplets he never knew existed. Cameras flashed as he climbed the stairs, his jaw set, his hand firmly holding Emma's. Ethan clutched his sleeve with a soldier's discipline, while Evan, still pale from his hospital stay, rested against Jack's shoulder. Jack ignored the stares, the hushed comments. This wasn't about reputation anymore. This was about blood dye inside. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper. The judge, Margaret Parker, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, sat at the bench with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of human ugliness. She struck her gavel once, and the whispers died instantly. At the opposing table sat Melissa Reynolds. She was immaculate as always, navy dress pressed, her posture as rigid as marble. Her lawyer, a slick man named David Crane, leaned close, whispering strategy. Melissa's eyes, however, were locked on the triplets, and though she tried to arrange her face into maternal warmth, Jack could see the flicker of something else, something brittle, something desperate. "Your Honor," Crane began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "My client has been the sole caregiver to these children since birth. She has nursed them through illnesses, overseen their schooling, provided stability in the absence of a father who, let us be frank, chose to pursue corporate empire building over responsibility. Mr. Thompson appears now, 8 years too late, claiming paternal rights out of guilt or perhaps vanity." Jack's lawyer, Catherine Mills, rose calmly. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Thompson's absence was not by choice, but by deliberate interference on the part of Ms. Reynolds. We will demonstrate that she intercepted communication, sabotaged medical appointments critical to one child's health and manipulated her sister, Sarah Mitchell, into believing she had been abandoned. In truth, Mr. Thompson saw Sarah repeatedly his letters, phone calls, even financial support payments were stolen or redirected. He was not absent. He was denied. Judge Parker's eyes narrowed. We'll see the evidence. The first witness was Fred Wilson, the retired postmaster. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. I kept my own notes, he said, holding up a small ledger. Melissa Reynolds collected Sarah's mail often. Nothing wrong with that, but I noted a pattern: certified letters from Seattle, always arriving when Melissa came in first. Sarah later asked me about letters she expected, but by then they were gone, signed for, not by her. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Melissa's jaw tightened, but she kept her chin high. Next came Kelly Diaz, her former assistant. I handled errands for Ms. Reynolds, she said nervously. She asked me more than once to cancel or reschedule Sarah's medical appointments, saying it was an insurance issue. I overheard her once tell Sarah a specialist had canceled, but I knew she had canceled it herself. Jack's heart twisted as Dr. Ramirez, Evan's cardiologist, took the stand. This child's condition required specialist care years ago, she said firmly. Records show repeated cancellations of crucial appointments. Those cancellations came from Ms. Reynolds' IP address. Had Sarah's wishes been honored, Evan's health crisis could have been avoided. Melissa shifted uncomfortably now, her lawyer scribbling furiously on his pad. Finally, Michael stepped forward with a digital projection of recovered emails. These were drafts on Sarah's old laptop, emails she wrote to Jack, pleading for answers, asking why he had abandoned her, why he never responded. They were never sent. But here, he clicked to the next slide, are the server logs. Every time Sarah typed Jack's email address, it was auto-corrected to a fake account. Who set up that account? Melissa Reynolds. The silence in the courtroom was electric. Even Judge Parker leaned forward, her hands steepled. Ms. Reynolds, she said at last, her voice cutting through the heavy air. Do you deny intercepting letters, canceling medical appointments, and manipulating communications between your sister and Mr. Thompson? Melissa's composure cracked. A bead of sweat glistened at her temple. I was protecting her, she snapped suddenly, her voice rising. Protecting her from him, from his money, his obsession, his ambition. He would have destroyed her. Catherine's voice was quiet, but razor sharp. Protecting her or punishing her because she had something you never could. Melissa's hand slammed the table. She had everything, she cried, her voice trembling with fury. The looks, the love, our parents' affection. And then she had 3 perfect children when I couldn't have even one. Her words spilled out, raw, jagged, unstoppable. Why should he get them now? He didn't earn them. I did. I was there every day. They're mine. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Jack sat frozen. The triplets pressed against him. They're small, faces pale, but steady. Judge Parker banged her gavel sharply. Order. The room fell silent again. Melissa stood heaving, her carefully polished mask shattered beyond repair. Judge Parker's gaze was unyielding. The court finds that Melissa Reynolds engaged in willful deception and manipulation that endangered the welfare of the children. Custody is awarded to their biological father, Jack Thompson. Ms. Reynolds will be granted limited supervised visitation contingent on counseling. The gavel struck once more, and it was over. Outside, beneath the open Montana sky, Jack crouched. To meet his children's eyes, Emma clutched his shirt, whispering, "Does this mean we can stay?" "Yes," Jack said, his voice breaking with relief. "Yes, it means you're home, forever." And for the first time in his life, Jack Thompson felt like the wealthiest man in the world. Snow lingered in the folds of the Montana hills, melting slowly under the first warmth of spring. The farmhouse, once an empty shell, had transformed in only a few short months into a place alive with color and noise. Toys lay scattered across the yard, a tire swing swayed gently in the breeze, and laughter spilled from windows that used to look out on silence. Jack Thompson stood on the porch one morning, coffee cooling in his hands, and watched his children race through the fields as though they had lived there their whole lives for years. He had measured his worth in numbers and stock prices. Now, he measured it in footsteps echoing across the floor, boards at dawn, and the sound of 3 small voices calling him daddy. The custody battle was behind them, but its scars lingered. Sometimes Emma would still wake at night clutching her teddy bear, whispering for her mother, "Ethan." ever serious, still watched Jack with sharp, calculating eyes, testing the strength of promises made, and Evan, though his health was finally stable after his procedure in Denver, sometimes grew quiet, humming softly to himself as if remembering days when silence was his only comfort. Jack had learned patience. He had learned to listen. He had learned that being a father wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up every day, even when it was hard. On the 1-year anniversary of the day he found them on the road, Jack gathered the triplets in the backyard. The air was fresh, tinged with the scent of wet earth and pine. A young cherry tree stood ready in the soil, its roots waiting to claim the land. The children gathered around it, their eyes curious. "This tree is for your mom," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "She loved cherry blossoms. She told me once they reminded her that life is short but beautiful. Today, we plant this to remember her and to remember the day you found me." Each child added something to the soil. Emma placed a painted stone, her tiny fingers brushing the bark as though blessing it. Ethan dropped a polished pinnacone he had guarded for weeks, his face solemn. Evan unfolded a paper bird he had drawn and folded himself, his gentle hands tucking it carefully into the earth. Jack pressed the soil down around the roots, his hands strong, steady, firm. Together, they watered the sapling, and for a moment the four of them stood shoulder to shoulder, the morning light crowning them in gold. Later, after the children ran inside, Jack opened a wooden chest he had been sorting through in Sarah's old house. Inside were the treasures of a life-interrupted scrapbooks, children's artwork, and at the very bottom, an envelope yellowed by time. His name was written on the front in Sarah's familiar handwriting. The date in the corner stopped his breath. It had been written only 3 weeks before her accident. With trembling hands, Jack unfolded the letter. "Dear Jack, if you're reading this, I finally found the courage to send it. For years I believed you had chosen not to be part of our children's lives. I've recently discovered this may not be true. I found letters hidden in Melissa's guest room, letters I wrote to you that never reached you. I don't know what happened, but I need to believe the man I love would never have abandoned us if he knew. Our triplets are extraordinary. Ethan has your determination, Emma your creativity, Evan your gentle heart. They ask about you often. I've only ever told them their father is a good man. If there is any chance you were as much a victim as I was, then maybe we can find a way forward for them, if not for us, if nothing else. Know that they are the best of both of us." Sarah's words blurred as tears filled Jack's eyes. Sarah had discovered the truth. She had been ready to find him again. Fate had stolen that chance. But in his arms, he still carried what they had created together. That evening, Jack called the children to the cherry tree. Together, they placed the letter in a waterproof capsule along with photographs. From their first year together, pancake mornings, hospital recoveries, snowstorms, and smiles. They buried it at the base of the sapling, covering it with soil. "When you're 18, Jack told them, his voice steady, "we'll open this together, and you'll see how far we've come. You'll see the truth, and you'll know that your mother's love never left you." The children nodded solemnly, and then Emma reached for his hand, Ethan for the other. Evan climbed onto his lap when they sat on the porch swing later. The three of them pressed against him as the stars appeared overhead. The Montana night stretched wide and endless, the cherry sapling standing tall in the yard like a sentinel of memory and hope. Jack looked at the children, their eyes shining in the starlight, and felt a truth stronger than any fortune he had built. He had been lost, chasing shadows of success. But these children had found him on a dusty road with nothing but a photograph and a desperate question. "Are you our daddy?" they had asked. And now, with the weight of Sarah's letter in the soil and 3 small bodies leaning against him, Jack whispered the answer again, certain, unshakable. Double quotes, "Yes, forever."